Welcome. It's tough enough to move on with one's life after doing time for a crime, but it turns out the millions of rap sheets, the official court record of offenses, are fraught with errors, often making a second chance even harder. We'll get to this in a moment. But also on the program today, student debt. It's the deepest ever, and a study reveals it's the biggest stressor in many young lives. Then we are joined by the chairman of the American Turkish Society, which launches the 14th annual Turkish Film Festival in town this week. And towards the end of the hour, what was next to the Apollo Theater before that Red Lobster moved in? Photos of Harlem then and now. First, though, rap sheets. According to an investigation by the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, warrants and youth records that are supposed to be sealed forever often end up resurfacing. And that's just one kind of rap sheet error that can make getting a fresh start difficult after any legal offense at all. This revelation of sloppy record keeping first appeared in City Limits magazine, and here to share it with us are two of the reporters who, as CUNY journalism students, did the investigation. Welcome, Caroline Lewis and Rebecca Bratek. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So who wants to tell us a story first of someone whose life was changed for the worse by an error on a rap sheet?
Well, we had a story that we told in our investigation that was really interesting about a man who went to prison for 5 years. He came out really looking to turn his life around, get a job and things like that. And he found 3 new arrests on his record, and for crimes he allegedly committed while he was incarcerated. So even though he could prove that he did not commit these crimes because he was in prison at the time, it took him 7 years to get them off his record.
And in general, what kinds of consequences are we talking about if these things are on the record?
Yeah, so for a lot of these errors, you don't notice that they exist until you go to apply for a job or apply for an apartment or anything that someone might check your background, your criminal background. And oftentimes people are denied a job or housing or told that they just can't have something because they have this criminal record. And then you go through the process of trying to get it fixed so you can get a job or get a house or anything like that.
You had the story in the article of a substitute teacher. You know who I'm talking about? Can you tell us that story?
Mm-hmm. Yes, a woman, Melissa, who was trying to get her license to be a substitute teacher, which shouldn't be too difficult. And she found that a charge for a shoplifting crime she had committed 20 years earlier was still pending on her looked like it was still pending on her record, even though she had served her community service, and meaning that the case should have been sealed. And when a case is sealed, it means the details are hidden from potential employers or landlords and things like that, and it looks like it's been resolved. But a lot of the times, cases are left unsealed for whatever reason.
Rebecca, what's the law on this? What is supposed to actually happen?
Yeah, original records of arrests or things like that have been solved are supposed to be destroyed after 6 years, and oftentimes because of whatever reason, these records don't get destroyed or they don't get closed or someone forgets to check off a box that it's been sealed. So because the system is so tangled and different between different agencies, a lot of times what's supposed to happen just doesn't happen.
And clarify for us which records are really supposed to be sealed?
Yeah, it's supposed to be your criminal record history. So your rap sheet is your official record that is on file, that is linked with your fingerprint, and the only person who can access that is yourself. Anyone else can view your criminal record history, the parts that are supposed to be sealed, if they pay a fee or they're a criminal background checker for jobs or housing or things like that. And that fee, you can also get that record, but it's a $65 fee, $60 or $65 fee. So it's often tough to get and tough to see that.
So to keep the terminology straight, is rap sheet different from some other kind of permanent record?
Yeah, so a rap sheet is the official law enforcement term, and then your criminal record, which could be described as your criminal record, your permanent record, or anything like that, that is what is accessible by anyone.
And Caroline, this number 2.1 million problematic rap sheets, where does that come from?
So there's about 7.1 million New Yorkers have rap sheets. Or criminal records.
Wait, there are only 8 million New Yorkers.
Well, the thing is, people actually can get rap sheets even if they haven't committed a crime. Like, it might be generated because you needed to do a background check for a job or something like that. So sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a criminal if you have a rap sheet. So a lot of people have rap sheets, and there's no real official record of how many of them have mistakes on them. So the way we got the 2.1 million is we looked at a number from the Legal Action Center, which is an organization that helps people actually fix the errors on their rap sheets. And they said from about 3,500 rap sheets they saw in 2013, about 30% of them had errors.
Wow.
And so that's where we got the 2.1 million, but other organizations we talked to found their own numbers, some of them up to 60% had errors.
So how does an individual fix the record once they discover an error, especially if it's hampering their application process for a job or school?
Well, it really varies. It depends on the source of the error and your knowledge of the system, and sometimes just pure luck. So, for instance, if you need a case sealed that isn't sealed, it might just be a matter of going to the courts, talking to the clerks, and if they can find your file and confirm that it should be sealed, they might do it on the spot. But like I said, this other man who had these arrests that were clearly mistakes was shuffled between the police department, the DA's office, the courts, and it took him 7 years. And finally, it took the Manhattan District Attorney writing a letter to the Department of Criminal Justice Services saying they were not going to prosecute for it to get taken off of his record.
Wow. Rebecca, how much of this can be attributed to technological errors or failure to update the system technologically?
Advocates will argue that it's completely due to modernization of the system. As I said, a lot of these old records are paper copies before computers were around, and they're supposed to be destroyed and computerized, but because each branch, DCJS, OCA, the police departments, they all have different systems, and it doesn't get streamlined. So the problem is that when someone's going to DCJS or OCA or the police officers, they're not getting the same information. So a lot of advocates think that this could be fixed by modernizing.
And are there political obstacles to this? Why doesn't it just happen?
From the advocates that we've spoken to, they've been advocating for this for almost a decade and for these changes. And a lot of it is people just don't know it exists. A lot of lawmakers, it's not on their radar. In New York State, the past few legislative sessions have been dominated by bigger issues, gay marriage, things like that. And it's been hard to, when advocates go to a lawmaker's office and talk to the aides, when they go report back to the lawmaker, don't come back with these issues. It
just doesn't rise to a priority level,
yeah.
Although they pass hundreds of bills in the state legislature every year on all kinds of things that nobody ever heard about. So you would think, if this is not too controversial, that they could get it through. Do you think anybody's actually resisting this for their own purposes?
I think from what we've heard from talking to lawmakers, it's, people are amenable to this. It's the kind of thing where, it might languish in committee and people just really are unaware of it, but and whether or not they think that the bills that are pending are the ones that should be passed, they do think there should be some kind of solution.
Where'd the idea for this come from? You were in the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, and somehow you discover a problem with erroneous rap sheets. How'd you even get onto this?
I think it came from the pamphlets from the Legal Action Center, right? I think it came from their estimate of, that this high percentage of rap sheets have errors. And it's the kind of thing where we try to drill down the numbers, but then we also sort of fanned out, and some of us looked into the victims, the people being affected by this. Some of us went and, looked at how records are processed in the clerk's offices and things like that.
Tell me another story, or go into one of the stories that you told us even further about what the steps are to try to get an erroneous rap sheet fixed.
So I'll go back to Kevin Clear, the guy who spent 7 years trying to fix his record. He had the help of a legal professional, first of all, and someone who sort of knew what they were doing. But he had to start by going back to the precinct where he was first arrested. And the really shocking thing about it is that they had no idea what he was talking about. They were like, well, maybe you should go to One Police Plaza to the headquarters and see if they know. And people processing data there also really said, what are you doing here? And so I think it's that phenomenon that's been so shocking with this, just the fact of people in these different agencies having no one assigned to really deal with the problem, not recognizing that it's an issue, let alone a systemic issue. And I think some of them say, mistakes happen in the course of processing records, and that may be true, but until people recognize that it's an issue and set aside resources and personnel to deal with it, people are going to still be, stuck in this snafu.
Rebecca, would it take one law or more than one laws to fix this?
Right now, advocates have a package of 3 bills that they're really pushing, but it's never been a question of pass them all or pass none. It's kind of been, we need to take the steps to fix this and get something done, and once reforms come to one area, they'll come to others. So it's kind of been that.
Are there people who are sort of pro-law enforcement, like in the legislature, who think that this may wind up being too soft on people who have committed crimes?
We haven't heard any public criticism of the bills, and that's why it's been so weird. And a lot of people guess that it could be coming from Republican lawmakers who might not want to be soft on crime, or afraid that if you seal off these records, no one will be able to see it, and lawmakers won't be able to see that these dangerous people are out, or things like that. So a lot of the problem has been from just not knowing, people not knowing what this issue is.
So if some of the Republican lawmakers are throwing up those obstacles, it would be behind the scenes because nobody's opposing the bills publicly.
Yeah, we could not find anyone who was opposing them publicly.
Yeah. So you're both young journalists. You just got out of journalism grad school. Was this your first sort of big investigative report for each of you? Caroline, was it for you?
I would say collaboratively it was. Like, there have been other things that I've been, motivated to look into on my own. Like, I did a piece on solitary confinement, things like that. But I think working with other people, you get to cover so much more ground, which is exciting.
And you?
Definitely was the biggest, first investigative kind of project that I've done. So never really had done it before, so it was fun.
What'd you learn by doing it?
I think the biggest thing was to learn how to work as a team that was investigating, and how to go and find these records and find the lawmakers and just keep pounding on the doors until someone answers.
Dealing with flax is a big one. It's important, certainly.
Public relations officials,
right.
flax, for government.
Exactly.
For politicians primarily, we call them flax.
Mm-hmm. And finding out, how to work with people who maybe at first, are not amenable or don't really know what you're talking about, then finding the person who's willing to dive into the records and dive into the data and really help you out.
Is it spreading around the web? Are people passing it around and talking about it?
We're trying to get them to. I mean, I think it's something where people are aware more so recently of the consequences of having a criminal record. Like, there was a recent article in the New York Times, talking about how it can stop people from getting jobs and housing and things like that. And so I think in the context of that, people should pay attention to the fact that there are so many mistakes on people's records to begin with.
It's a good time for this story to come out, I think, because there's so much focus on the excessive incarceration in this country and doing things about that, and the ban the box movement to try to get people who even earn the raps on their rap sheets to not have to say that they were arrested in every single case in which they apply for a job until they get to a certain point. So now this comes along and it kind of fits right in with the push for criminal justice reform in general. And I would think it would be low-hanging fruit because it's just fixing the errors. It's not letting people off any easier than they're being let off today.
Right. Well, I think there's a tendency when you find out that someone has a criminal record to just sort of sweep them under the rug and say, these are the criminals of society, we don't need to deal with it. And so it's nice that there's more of a move to humanize people with criminal records lately. Right.
And it's probably harder for them than it might have been in another economy where the job market was less competitive. If there's a lot of unemployment, and I know unemployment's getting better, but if there's a lot of unemployment, then people can be a lot more selective. You see college graduates, working at fast food restaurants and things like that because that's all they can get. And then it becomes even harder for people with criminal records to get back on their feet.
Exactly.
Which then winds up encouraging more recidivism if they find out that they don't have many straight choices. So big context for this.
Absolutely.
All right, where can people see this article?
On citylimits.org. You can find, it's a 6-part series with some of the individual stories I told you and some resources as well.
Well, good luck, and thank you both very much.
Thank you
for sharing your work with us. After the break, diploma debt, student loans take their toll in stress. Time for a Public Intellectual, where we look at new research with the power to change minds and public policy. A river of tuition increases and a constricted job market have left college graduates with a collective IOU of $1.2 trillion, which surpasses Americans' credit card debt. The figure is stunning, but the side effects of this debt can be measured in dollars, or they can't be measured in dollars alone, I should say. Today, we look at a recent study in the Journal of Social Science and Medicine, which found a strong correlation between heavy student debt and high levels of stress. And relief from the Obama administration's proposed Student Aid Bill of Rights is not likely to arrive from gridlock Washington. How much of a toll is diploma debt taking on young people? Here via Skype from Austin, Texas, is lead researcher Katrina Walsemann, associate professor in the Department of Health Promotion, Education, and Behavior at the University of South Carolina. Thank you for joining us. Hello from New York.
Hi, thank you for having me.
What research question were you trying to answer?
Well, as you mentioned, one of the problems with student debt is not only that it's growing, but that it amounts to over $1 trillion that Americans are holding. And so we were really interested in the relationship between student debt and mental health among young adults, particularly because there's not a lot known empirically about this. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence of students talking about the amount of stress that they experience from student loan debt. But we wanted to look empirically using a national sample to answer that question.
How did you measure stress?
Well, we actually measured psychological functioning, mental health. It's more of a measure of symptomology. So things like how often in the past 30 days have you felt sad, down in the dumps, calm or peaceful, happy, things like that. So it's not a direct measure of stress per se, but it's more of a measure of well-being or functioning.
And how do you correct for external factors that might be contributing to the stress or whatever other mental health symptoms?
Yeah, in our study, we actually adjusted in our models for a range of socioeconomic status indicators other than just debt. So we had things like educational attainment, occupational status, marital status, race, other things that might be correlated with mental health and could be correlated with student debt as well. And even with all of those adjustments, we found this effect between student loans and mental health.
What ages were the people who you questioned? When did they go to college?
Well, these were people who were born between 1980 and 1984. So a lot of them were entering college in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And so what we did was we looked at student loans and mental health in two different ways. So first, we wanted to look at the relationship between the total amount of student loans that they accumulated over the course of schooling and their mental health when they were in their late 20s or early 30s. And then we also were interested in whether the taking out of student loans while they were actually still in school, so they were current students, was associated with mental health as well. And in either condition, we found that student loan borrowing was associated with poor mental health.
Did you look at majors or fields of study or professions that people went into, like maybe somebody going to medical school has to take out a lot more debt, but maybe it's the profession of doctoring that's making them stressed or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point because a lot of the a significant amount of debt is taken out by people who go into some of these professions, such as medical school or lawyers, for instance. They also carry a lot of debt. Unfortunately, there just wasn't a lot of people in the study because nationally they comprise less than 1 or 2% of the national population. But we did try to look at occupational status in a more refined way, to look at the people who went to be doctors and lawyers, and whether this relationship between student loans and mental health differed for them. But we didn't really find anything. I think that you would probably need a larger sample of just the doctors and lawyers to really see if there was a difference between them and, say, people who graduated with a bachelor's degree.
Right. How large was your sample size? How many, post students did you talk to?
So we actually use data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. It's collected from the Bureau of Labor, or by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and overall there were 9,000 people who were interviewed, and of those, about 4,500 had ever enrolled in college, and so we looked at that subgroup of people in our analysis.
How do results turn up along socioeconomic strata? Do you find that socioeconomic factors contribute?
Yeah, so I think you're probably talking about the question related to parental wealth, and we were really interested in whether students who grew up in families that had negative net worth if there was a different relationship between student loans and mental health. And what we actually found was that for those who grew up in families where the parents had negative net worth, their mental health actually was better the more student loans that they took out, which is a little bit surprising. But then for the people who grew up in families that had at least some amount of net worth, we found the same result that we had previously found, which was that more student loans was associated with poor mental health.
We actually have a graphic that puts some of this in a visual.
Yes.
For our viewers. So can you explain the red dotted line and the blue dotted line?
So the red dotted line is indicating those students who grew up in families where their parents had negative net worth, and as you can see, it goes up. So and in our study, mental health was measured such that higher values indicated better mental health. So you can see that as as you borrow more student loans, which is on that x-axis on the bottom, you actually see an improvement in mental health. And then the blue line is for those people who had parental wealth in the top quartile, and you can see that there's that negative association. The more student loans that you borrowed, the worse your mental health was.
So if a family had parents in debt, the students would be happier by getting further in debt.
Yeah, it seems a little counterintuitive, but we were thinking that one possible explanation could be that students who are coming from families where the parents had negative net worth, they might be using student loans as a way to go to college. Otherwise, they may never have been able to actually go to college. And by going to college, they improved their mental health. And so it might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but in some ways it seems it
right,
could be
because in their cases the hypothesis is that the debt represented hope for the future.
Yeah, and access to education that they might not have had access to otherwise.
But both these groups, the red line group and the blue line group, are first generation, second generation.
Combination of all of those things. We weren't really able to look at what you're talking about there with first or second generation college students.
How about job outcomes? In other words, did the students with higher debt report higher incomes, higher status, or did you even look at that?
Yeah, actually we did, and just descriptively, we looked at some of those differences, and I can't actually, now that you're asking me, I'm not off the top of my head sure about what we were looking at, but I mean what we found. But I think that generally the people who went to college, went to four-year colleges, got a bachelor's degree, they ended up taking more student loans out than people who, say, went to two-year colleges or didn't complete their college degree. But in the end, the relationship was robust to all of those types of differences amongst individuals.
Do you think that there are certain aspects of having a lot of student debt that contribute to the mental health problems? In other words, is it fear of default on your loans? Is it having less disposable income than your peers because so much of it has to go to pay back the loan every month? Were you able to isolate any of the even more specific causes?
Yeah, unfortunately, the NLSY doesn't have those measures in them, measures of stress or financial strain that they ask the respondents. But we did speculate that one of the ways in which student loans were affecting mental health could be through stress. And there's research out there that's looked at other forms of debt as it relates to mental health and also relates to stress, and finds that people who are in debt end up reporting more stress and also poor mental health. And we think that student loans may be unique, although we weren't able to directly test whether it's a unique effect. But for some of the reasons that you said, that student loans, you cannot default on them very easily. You can't declare bankruptcy and get rid of your student loans. I joke sometimes that the only way to get out of student loans is to pay them off or to die, unfortunately. So this could cause more stress than, say, credit card debt, which in some instances you can negotiate different terms to repay them, or if you have to, you can declare bankruptcy and get out of some of that debt.
So last question. What fixes, if any, do you recommend for this? And does President Obama's student loan Bill of Rights, even if Congress has no prospect of passing it, would it make a difference in your opinion?
Well, I'm not sure that my study can give concrete recommendations for policy changes, but I think that it's the first step in getting more information to policymakers about the importance of student debt for other aspects beyond just the economic well-being of students and their families. And I think that it's always great when policymakers are thinking about these things and are talking about these things, and that President Obama has put forward some options. I'm not sure if these things are going to necessarily fix some of these problems, and I think there's research that's needed to actually look at whether some of these policy changes that have been put in place in the past 10 years are having a meaningful difference in the lives of individuals and their families. And I think that's important for the future.
Thank you very much for joining us. Good luck with your future research.
Thank you.
Up next, Istanbul on the Hudson. We preview the Turkish Film Festival after this break. In recent years, Turkish films have been finding commercial success in Europe, across the Arab world, and now in the United States. The 14th annual New York Turkish Film Festival begins this Friday, March 27th. Each year, the event has served as a cultural bridge, linking the city's Turkish population to their fellow New Yorkers. Here to tell us about the festival and his nonprofit organization that promotes economic, political, and cultural ties between Turkey and the United States, and to help us screen some excerpts, is Murat Koprulu, chairman of the American Turkish Society. Welcome to our studio.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
First, just tell everybody about the festival. Where is it? How many venues? What kind of films?
Yes, well, the festival has been in place since 1999. We started at the, most festival goers in New York will know some of these places, but the Anthology Film Archives in the Lower East Side was our first venue. And now we're at the SVA, School for Visual Arts and Design, on 23rd Street in Chelsea. And it runs for a week, from Friday this week to Saturday, Friday 27th to Saturday, April 4th, every day. And, you know, the process is quite extensive. There's a professional jury, so we have picked, you know, 7 films out of many, many, many that were submitted. 7 films, and we've got excerpts from 3 of them to show our viewers. This is from the film called Song of My Mother. Yes.
Here we go.
والغريبين نافقدني بين مصطفى براtek. الو يا دكي عرفت الكويلة
Trailer for Song of My Mother from the Turkish Film Festival, a winner of Best Film and Best Actor at the Sarajevo Film Festival.
Yeah.
Beautiful scenery, beautiful cinematography there.
Yes, Erol Mintaş is the filmmaker, an up-and-coming filmmaker. Interesting that, for example, the Sarajevo Film Festival has become one of the sort of novel festivals in Europe that feeds into the Cannes Film Festival. So you first kind of make your name at the Sarajevo, and then you become an entrant into the Cannes Film Festival. So a lot of these, we've had tremendous, actually, success with earlier films, with nobodies, let's call them, who then went on to great acclamation, actually. We've been quite lucky.
And this story deals with the issue of the Kurdish population in Turkey, right? Kurdish immigration into Turkey, the Kurdish region of Turkey?
Yes, well, but this is in particular rural-urban migration in particular. In other words, it happens in every country that's developing.
People moving from the country to the city.
In Mexico, in Indonesia, in South Africa. In this particular instance, it's about the Kurdish immigration from the hinterland into the big city. And in the area that they used to live, this young man is more like an older man by now, his mother. I mean, this is a timeless story. You know, we all have elderly people in our lives that we need to take care of, and they're all starting to lose their ability to function, etc. So it really speaks to everything that we do in our lives every day.
The story is universal.
And it's universal, and it's about, people who are really from the country, and they're lost in the city to some extent, and they're lost in their own kind of ethnicity to some certain extent. And then not only that, but they're displaced by gentrification from their, sort of very authentic home in one part of the town to a big cinder block of a building, 20-story building.
Because isn't it that gentrification forces them to move?
Yeah. So there are all these concepts coming
New Yorkers
together.
Can relate to that.
Well, Harlem changing, street by street. I mean, this is everywhere. It's in Jakarta, it's in Mexico City. So he's really taken all of those elements and has done an amazing, and like you can see, the cinematography is just stunning.
Let's take a look at the trailer for another film. This is called Sea Burners. Is that the correct translation of the title?
That's right. Kumun tadı, it's not well done. It's more like the taste of sand. Is the way I would have translated. It's about, And
what's the film about?
Well, the film, again, it's about a whole sort of symbolic barriers between people, barriers between places and people. I mean, it has like I say, a lot of these films are speaking to things that we all worry about in our daily lives. I mean, that's how they were in a way picked.
As so many great films do, whether they come from the United States or India or Iran or Turkey or wherever, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And in the case of Sea Burners, I believe Melissa Önel is the young cinematographer. It's a woman. It's one of the up-and-coming female filmmakers, and she's remarkable.
All right, let's see this trailer.
Kaç kişiler?
7 kişi. Bir de çocuk var.
Hadi al.
Yok ettin işi. Sıçtın batırdın.
boy with a motorcycle. What was his name?
Ne zaman gideceğiz?
Sen niye geri döndün ki abi?
Okay, and what we saw on the screen there was not English subtitles, I assume.
Yeah,
At the screening there will be
There will
English
be,
language
yes.
subtitles.
They all have subtitles. This is sort of last minute.
Yes. Is the Turkish film industry burgeoning? Is there a recent sort of cultural thrust in Turkey?
For about, since, as I say, since just after we started our film festival in 1999, early 2000s, it has been really exploding. And in fact, what's happening is that not only is, sort of mainline cinema becoming big in terms of in main cinemas, but there's a very big sort of local production of television shows, especially shows that are something about Turkish history and Ottoman history and empire and the lands of that part of the world, and that has become huge all over the Middle East. I mean, there are certain series on television that are translated into 45 different languages, from Russia to Central Asia to the Middle East and to Africa, of Turkish shows, meaning productions that are entirely Turkish.
And are there themes within this set of films that push the boundaries of what they can do? I know Turkey is a relatively westernized country as the Middle East goes, but are they pushing the bounds of what the authorities will allow to be shown?
Exactly. I mean, this is really one of the elements. I mean, but in every society that has some element of, sort of conservatism together with a history of sort of control of media and that sort of a background, film has always presented the opportunities to go into those bounds. I mean, some of the films that we showed early in the 2000s, for example, dealt very squarely about the plight of the Kurdish peoples when it was anathema to talk about these things, and we were the first to ever do it, outside the country.
Right, because like in the various countries in the region that have Kurdish minorities, the government is afraid of an independence movement, a breakaway movement, right? So they don't want to give the Kurdish population a lot of respect and their due. So I guess this film humanizes through not a political story, but the personal story.
But that's changing now also. I mean, coming with, the sort of the cultural changes that always happen through history, the country and the government and the Kurdish people, political forces, are becoming more attuned to a sort of coming to grips with a society where Kurds are more accepted. In fact, Kurdish national television, which is owned by the government, has now a separate Kurdish TV, where Kurdish TV is only in the Kurdish language. There's no Turkish in that TV channel. So you can turn on a TV channel and you will see only Kurdish shows.
Try to stop people from becoming separatists by repressing them or by trying to make them feel included.
If you can't beat them, join them. Yeah, that kind of thing. Right.
All right, let's watch one more trailer for a film from the Turkish Film Festival in New York over the next week and a half or so. This one is called The Impeccables, and I haven't seen it, but I gather there's some secrets and lies, and there's also some humor in this one, yes?
Yes, exactly.
All right, let's watch this trailer.
Küçükken 2-3 oğlan senin topunu çalmıştı. Onları süpürgeyle kovalamıştın, hatırlıyor musun? Ötleri kopmuştu. Nereden hatırladın? Hatırladım işte. Ya yapma.
Sence niye burada bu? Tatil için gelmiştir. Niye gelecek?
evde morun evde gelmiş adam masada şarap içiyor.
Abartma. Zararsız biri işte belli.
30 saniye komşunun iyi birine benzediğini anladın değil mi Yasemin? Neden aklına gelmedi? Neden sana en çok ihtiyacım oldu? Hiçbir zaman da sen benim yanımda yoktun.
Wait, what did she yell at the end? I want to know.
Well, we don't want to give the big secret away of what is really, you know, the big terrible
But it's the
thing.
trailer. You can tell us what's in the trailer.
Yeah, yeah. No, she's just saying, I'm just horrified by this whole thing. I mean, it's again one of these stories where there are these two sisters who are very, very modern, as you can tell, you know, hanging out in their bikinis on the beach, and then they come to visit family, and some things start to become known, you know, in a family gathering. Again, it's something that we've all grappled with, you know, something that we learned about our family that was a deep, dark secret that has completely, you know, changed the dynamic of the family, and the two sisters who were loving, and suddenly, you know, things start happening. I mean, it's just, the whole story, you just can't stop watching it. It's unbelievable.
Tell us more about your group, the American Turkish Society. What else do you do?
Well, thank you. You know, we have a very wide variety of programming that is cultural, artistic, educational, as well as events that are about the economics and politics and geopolitics and geopolitical tensions in that part of the world. You know, when you look at Turkey, unfortunately or fortunately in some instances, you know, you look at the New York Times, there's a 30% chance when, you know, you open up the newspaper, there's an article that either talks about Turkey or mentions Turkey peripherally because it's mentioning Syria or Iraq or Iran or Greece or Russia or whatever. You see, I mean, it's so much in the mix of things now. So, you know, we try to deal with that in a very wide variety of ways that try to give American audiences, you know, a feel for what you saw, in the sense that there are people here with just ordinary issues and ordinary problems that are just like us here, right here in New York City, and you know, we also do the reverse. We have scholarships and fellowships of Americans going to Turkey. We have partnerships with up to 35 very important NGOs in the United States, all the cultural institutions in New York, all the museums, for example, Metropolitan Museum, Museum of Modern Art. I mean, it's quite remarkable. We're 65 years old, which is hard to believe. In 1949, we were born right here in New York City, and back then, our people did some research, and there were only 2,000 NGOs in the United States. Names like Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation. So you're asking yourself the question, you know, post-World War II, the United States is an insular country, doesn't want to hear about the rest of the world, and all of a sudden, there's a Turkish institution in New York City. It's just ridiculous. It's mad.
And now Turkey is one of the most important relationships for the United States.
Yeah, and that's what we try to kind of get a grip on. And, you know, there's dissonance there, and yet, you know, some of the things, you know, we can understand from here. As Americans, I'm saying, we can understand some of these things, and some of these things we can't understand. So we're trying to, you know, nobody can figure this out, but we can at least bring more experts to the table and talk about it and understand it.
And just give us your web address. I think we're showing it on the screen, but I can't see it, just in case we're not. The web address to find out more about the Turkish Film Festival, which runs through April 4th.
Well, our main website will have it, AmericanTurkishSociety.org.
Simple enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Up next, seeing Harlem change before your eyes after the break. Harlem has changed so much. Langston Hughes and Billie Holiday would be disoriented. Mom and pop shops have become high-end boutiques. There's a Red Lobster next to the Apollo Theater. And at the intersection of MLK and Malcolm X Boulevards, a Whole Foods will appear across from Starbucks. We can't stop time, but we can record it so future generations can see what used to be. Albert Bratek, an architect turned photographer, has been documenting the changing landscape of Harlem. Let's see some of his great images and talk to him about them. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What got you shooting in Harlem?
Well, it really started when I was in architecture school at City College. I was really in love with photography before I even started architecture school. And while I was in school, a few friends of mine and I thought it would be a great thing to go and photograph Harlem. Took some photo classes, armed ourselves with SLR cameras, and could only afford one lens probably, and decided to
hopefully a very flexible lens.
No longer. No, I only had one. I only had the normal lens, and pretty quickly we discovered that we, as architecture students, we really didn't have time to do that, and didn't really have enough photography knowledge. So after I graduated, I decided to explore other options rather than to go work for an architect in an office, and photography kind of lent itself as one of those options, and it became a career.
All right, let's see how many of these shots we can see in our remaining time. And since you're an architect, people will recognize this as an iconic piece of Harlem architecture, although one that could be anywhere, I guess. This is?
It's a state office building. So I really started the series by trying to show important buildings in Harlem at their best. So a lot of the early ones were photographed at dusk. This was in 1999, where I just really acquired my first 4x5 camera, started really kind of seriously going into architectural photography.
So you kept the shutter open a long time. That's what the red streaks are. That's kind of showing a time lapse.
Exactly. So a time exposure would be a more accurate term, I guess.
Yes.
So yes, the shutter was open for some of these early ones, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And one interesting thing that happened actually when I was a student, and we would go out with our 35 millimeter cameras hanging around their necks, and we were kind of trying to take a picture here and take a picture there, and people were really upset by what we were doing, and I feel like it was because they felt like we were kind of almost trying to sneak something and maybe show the neighborhood in not so great way. Neighborhood,
right. White
in the
guy
90s.
Coming around with a camera, what is he snooping for?
Exactly. It was the 90s. So when I started working with the 4x5 camera, especially for this series, where I'm on one place for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, making these long exposures, it's very different. People were asking, "What am I doing?" People thought that I was on. It was a TV camera, because the camera itself is really large, and kids would come in front of it and kind of wave, ask what channel is it going to be on, and then be very disappointed to find out that it wasn't really going to be.
But it's an interesting lesson that people have a different response to a television camera than a still image camera. Let's go on to the next shot.
Sure.
The Teresa Hotel.
The Teresa Hotel, exactly. So diagonally across the street from the state office building. One of the state office building was such a dominant piece of architecture in Harlem. Went along with Teresa Hotel and I think the Harlem Hospital. It was really setting kind of like a height dominance, which is now being lost with all these other buildings coming up.
New construction. These were, at the time they were built, very high buildings for that far uptown.
Exactly, yep.
And this is historically a place where a lot of jazz happened.
A lot of jazz happened.
Fidel Castro stayed there. Now any Cuban could stay there with the new. I'm just kidding. the new dropping of the restrictions. Of course, they have to be able to afford to stay there. But okay, the Teresa Hotel.
Yeah.
Let's go right on to our next actually set of images, and I wonder if you can.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. No, all right. So my error. I jumped ahead, but let's do that one while we have it. This is going to be a series of images. So set this up for us.
So this block. So this is what was then actually Lenox Avenue, which is now Malcolm X Boulevard. Just south of 125th Street. So 125th Street is on the right-hand side, 124th Street on the left-hand side. It's a block that I kind of noticed going back and forth on 125th Street. And it was one weekend, late morning, I set out and I thought, I'm going to go take a picture of that block. Old Navy, at that time, it was starting to be apparent that change was coming to Carlin. Pathmark had just opened on 125th Street on the east side, and
was there an Old Navy there, or is that just a billboard?
No, the Old Navy opened in the building that's a mall, Harlem Mall. I can't remember where the Magic Johnson Theater is. That had just opened.
125th on the west side.
Yeah, so right by between Frederick Douglass Boulevard and St. Nicholas. So Old Navy was an anchor tenant on that building, along with Magic Johnson Theater.
So let's see the changes. So this is a shot from what year?
2000.
All right.
This is fall 2000.
Let's see the next image. This is the same shot. So something has come down. The billboard has changed. When is this?
So I think this is about 2006. I'm not entirely sure. It was all of the early ones are 4x5 film, and I guess I wasn't really as meticulous as keeping the record of time.
But about 6-7 years later, let's go to the next image, and we see change again.
Yes, and these two are fairly close to each other. These buildings really kind of came down fairly fast.
Yeah. Now, we think about the neighborhood evolving. This almost looks like it was devolving on this block if things were coming down rather than going up.
Yeah.
Next image.
And then it starts to look really empty. That's probably about 2010. And then 2012, with the median being expanded, this is one part of Mayor Bloomberg's initiative, the trees planted in the median. Also, between the first and this image, you can notice that the building on the right, which didn't exist in 2000,
that red building all the way on the right?
The red building, yeah. That's the office building with commercial on the floor. Commercial spaces on the ground floor.
So this represents the beginning of the revitalization over there. So now we're going to go to another contrast. We're going to see the same building here at two different times. What year is this?
This is
and
also
where is it?
So this is also Lenox Avenue or Malcolm X Boulevard now. This is just 2 blocks south from the previous picture, same side of the street, so between 122nd and 123rd Street.
There was a really long set of row houses, a lot of boarded up windows, as we can see.
Yeah, so there were only 2 brownstones here occupied, 2 in the middle, and the one on the far right was under renovation.
And viewers, look at the very small trees that are there on the block at this time, 2006, 2007. And
this is 2000 actually.
2000.
This is actually 2000, yeah.
And let's go to the next image.
Yeah, so that tree got really
a tree grows in Harlem. And so do occupied apartments. Apparently, no more boarded up windows.
Exactly. Only the one on the left actually is boarded up. At that time, the construction had started. And right now, actually, it looks like all the rest of them in this picture.
And this one, when, I'm sorry, did you say?
This is 2012.
Oh, so a big gap in time there, 12 years.
Yes.
Yes, so the tree grew, there were more cars parked, on the street, if that's indicative of anything?
Yes, so the parking rules actually changed. It was no standing at any time back then, and the one car that was in the previous picture was Pastor's Cadillac, which on a Sunday you could find.
You have 1 minute left. One more image. What's this?
The kids, I was actually on one of my expeditions walking through the neighborhood with a 4x5 camera, and I saw this little structure in the playground, which is not this, actually. The structure is behind me. And I thought, well, it's kind of interesting. It had these interesting paint with handprints, and well, I'll take a picture of this. And as I was setting up the camera, these 4 guys came to me and said, take a picture of us, take a picture of us. So I said, all right, I'll take a picture of you.
Great
so we did a picture in front of that little house, and then
Where can people see your work?
I have an agent that represents me, so it's at esto.com, and there are galleries, separate galleries, so Harlem is a separate gallery, and some of my commercial work is...
Great stuff, and great that you took this over time for us to see change before our eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And that's our program for today. Bum rap sheets, student loan stress, the Turkish Film Festival, and Harlem's past. For a second chance at this program, we're online at CUNY.tv if you missed anything. And we're here each week at this hour with a new program. Next time, Gregonomics. Greg David will be here taking his usual incisive bite into the Big Apple's economic future. And tune into my daily radio show weekdays on WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.